All right, guys, welcome to I think it's our fourth session. And in this session, we are going to be looking at the, we're going to be looking at chapter 3 of the Exploring Leadership text, as we can see here. And as you can see, this is 133 slides, and the reason why there's so many slides is because of the amount of detail coming in this chapter. So we will make an attempt at trying to go through all of them and kind of add explanation and, of course, questions and discussion along the way. This chapter is focused on looking at the relational leadership model and presenting it as an option for you to look at in terms of uh, helping you to determine your own leadership philosophies moving forward. So anybody had a chance to go through this PowerPoint before today, or this is your first time going through it?
First time for me, sir.
So that's not the
I read the chapter.
the thing we went through last week.
No. Last week we went through the emergence of leadership theory through the timelines. That's what we did last week.
No, I
Oh,
think
because
he's
I
right
think it
here.
was 130 something slides. So I
We did chapter 3 or chapter 2 last week.
Chapter 3.
So then today should have been somebody's presentation then.
correct, sir, because next week is my presentation.
Oh,
No, the next week is the first presentation.
Next week is the
no,
first one.
no. So
No,
today
sir,
is
I don't
supposed
think we did chapter 3 yet.
Yes.
I am the
exactly.
second. So if next week is next week's supposed to be a presentation because I am the second, and I supposed to be next week, I believe. And the first
No,
one is in
no,
Yeah,
no,
this
February.
week.
no.
Yeah.
Chapters 1
This week
and
is
2
supposed to
are
be
next
chapter
week.
3.
Yeah,
Oh,
chapter
next.
4 and 5. I still have
Oh, okay,
chapter
sorry,
3 to
sorry.
do. You're,
Oh, okay.
you're scaring me here, man. I
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
my
okay.
schedule just went
I know
to,
it's next week, so that will confuse me. Okay.
Yeah, remember there are two presentations next week, chapter 4 and chapter 5.
All right.
So I
Chapter
get
3.
five September.
Yeah, me too. Some people, want to jump the gun. What I tell you. All right, but coming along here, what I was saying was last week we spent a long time going through the emergence and the sort of the evolution of leadership theories from the 1900s coming forward. That's what we spent our time with last week. This week we're going to look specifically at the the relational leadership model. Um, and as it says here, it's an option for you to look at this model in informing your own personal leadership philosophies. All right. So in this model, of course, as the name would suggest, the leadership has to do with the nature of the relationships we've developed with people. And inherently, the relational leadership process is a communal process. So it pays a lot of attention on the nature of the relationships we develop with individuals because it's going to be pivotal to how you develop your philosophies and your procedures as to what you're working with moving forward. Leadership is always dependent on the context. So we also, as we learned from the previous chapter, where we looked at the issue of context impacting on the nature of leadership studies. Um, so we can't just look at only the relationship, but we also have to look at the context in which the leadership is being practiced. That's also going to be under the gun or under the microscope in this model as well. All right. Um, but the situation is such that the context is dependent upon the nature of relationships we develop. So if we think about it, about the types of relationships you have at work, those relationships are kind of governed by the context in which you have developed your the types of relationships. So at work, there's one type of context. In your family life, there's a different type of context. So therefore, there's a different nature to the relationships. It's generally going to be much closer, more emotive in nature. Um, If you have a group of friends, for example, that's a different context, and therefore the nature of your relationships there will be slightly different as well. And therefore, the context shapes the nature of those relationships you develop. And if any of you belong to any sort of community based organization, you'll also find that the type of the context of that organization also shapes the nature of the relationship. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the context and the relationships that we develop in this model. So that we have to pay attention to the two of them together. So remember, the definition is leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. This is to just remind ourselves of the definition that this model um, posits for us to look at. So moving forward, this model requires or involves focus on five primary components. It is it builds commitment towards positive purpose, so that's the first area. That purposes, sorry, that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view. So there's inclusivity, that's the second element. It empowers those that are involved. So empowerment is another element or component. It is ethical and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. So ethical is one of the other components, and process orientation is the next. So this is a model taken from the textbook again, or a visual of this, where you have purpose at the center, inclusivity as one of the behavioral things, empowerment or empowering activities as part of your behavioral activities, and ethics or ethical values that kind of governs everything. And all of this has to be done in a process oriented an approach to developing your leadership or leadership potential in the development. Now, what we'll go through each one or each of these components. So um, but some forewords here. So it does not seek to describe the way leadership is currently practiced, but is an aspirational model that proposes a view for you developing your own sort of leadership styles or leadership techniques that is um, proposed in developing and supporting a healthy, ethical, effective group. So these can be, this technique or techniques that you're looking at here can be utilized in many different circumstances. Formal groups, informal groups, whatever you find yourself arranged in, even when you're working in a class group activity, utilizing some of the techniques that we're going to cover here are going to be important. And we'll see why it has to be process driven, because we really are trying to get you to practice these types of activities in in an effective manner, and obviously practice makes perfect over time. All right. So let's look at purpose. Purpose is one of the core elements of the model. Most groups are, are guided, or most activities are guided by the function and purpose of the organization. So much so that we are going to be, there's a chapter on vision and mission that is going to be presented, which is where purpose really comes from. All right, so purpose influences the components of being inclusive, empowering, and ethical. It includes others, empowers them to use their leadership and talents, and is ethical in that it benefits others and improves the quality of life. So the purpose tends to be one of those higher order purposes. All right, and good organizations are vision driven and not position driven. That's an important distinction, because organizations that are position driven and not vision driven have a tendency to be short lived. In fact, once the individual who holds the position of leadership in that organization dies or is replaced, what ends up happening is that there's a transition in the vision of the organization, which can lead to its demise. All right, so that's something that we need to think about in terms of the deciding factor. Now, we met the knowing, being, doing cycle before. So individuals and leadership processes need to know themselves. We know about that part. They need to know themselves well before. Simple. That's interesting. All right, so they need to know themselves well before they can effectively begin to work with others and influence them to achieve some common good. So the getting to know process, which there's an assignment that we have given you in terms of your self-assessment, is a really important starting point to developing your own leadership skills and philosophies. The process, therefore, calls for you to be knowledgeable about yourself, but also about the things that you're getting involved with. To be aware of self and others, which is the being part, all right, and then to act, which is the doing element, to act based upon your understanding of these things around you. So the knowing, being, doing cycle or process that we were looking at before included in the development of your purpose and function. These three components are obviously interrelated. The knowledge you possess influences your ways of thinking, which makes sense, which then influences your actions. Your beliefs and ways of existing in this world influence your actions, which influences your behaviors. This is a pattern of influence that is circular in nature and is therefore not a straight kind of path. So if we think about it, the way in which we behave is really shaped a lot by what we value in life. So your belief structure is going to be an important element in determining your behavioral patterns. So understanding yourself better is going to be critical for you to be able to effect change if you have change to make. Uh, as with anybody, not nobody's perfect. So therefore, we find that generally there's a tendency to have to make some sort of adjustments and changes in our lives as we move forward. It's sort of like doing a gap analysis or what we refer to as variance analysis sometimes, where you look at a particular phenomenon or you look at a particular thing and you look and see where there uh, are variances between what is needed as opposed to what is present, and you try to make adjustments to have to deal with those variances. So this is something that this knowing, being, doing process is one of the processes that you will constantly be revisiting in order to correct things as you recognize them. So the knowing part especially is not something that can take place once and you're finished with it, because who you are as an individual is not something that stays constant throughout your entire lifetime. You change, you evolve, and you get better or you get worse based upon how badly things go. But we are looking for improvement in a positive light here across the board. All right. So Palmer, again taken from the textbook here, he uses the phrase head, heart, and practice. So that's the knowing, being, doing thing again. Head meaning understanding yourself, your heart being, what drives you, empowers you, what passions you have, and that those two things influence your practice. Now he used this in a metaphorical comparison with teaching, and he's always noted that teachers in particular who know their subject matter but have no passion for it and they don't care about what they're doing will have very faulty practice. Now, I know some of you all, unfortunately, may have experienced this personally, where you've come across teachers in the past who are really intelligent or highly qualified, but simply don't have the heart for the the profession that they've chosen, and therefore their practice reflects that. So this is the nature of why knowing, being, doing is so important, because regardless of what you know about yourself and about your skill levels of expertise, if your heart is not in it, if you don't have the ethical values that are required for the activities that you're getting up to, then your practice is going to reflect this. Unfortunately, as I said before, in the comparison that they're using here, unfortunately, some of us through our lifespan have encountered people in teaching positions that have reflected this. Would any of you all agree on, and do you have an example of that? Hopefully, you haven't met that type of disconnect in COSTAT, but you may have met it primarily in other areas, in secondary school and so on, where you've come across a teacher who just sort of like there for the bear kind of thing. For those of you who have it, all right. Anybody has had the misfortune of experiencing a teacher with no heart in the classroom? And were you able to recognize it? Might require some reflection to
Yeah.
think about. Yes?
No, I think so, but it wasn't a class that I was attending. I was just listening to a video, and the gentleman who was lecturing was sounding very monotonish, and he didn't seem to have any enjoyment
In the material?
teaching the class.
Well,
Well,
that
yeah, in the
may
material.
not necessarily be that he's not passionate about it. It just may mean he has very poor speaking habits. Um, but I guess that could be one, because then if he's not enlivening his presentation with some degree of passion, then maybe his practice has been impacted by that. And it happens to also, maybe you've, in your case there, or the case that you're speaking about, you may just simply be experiencing an off day for a teacher, because sometimes you have that disconnect taking place on a basis when somebody's not feeling well, or something is distracting them from the activities that they need to get into. I mean, I know I have had bad days when I'm teaching. I try not to let it impact on the practice of teaching, but what I'm speaking about here is somebody who is more systematically disconnected between the subject matter that they're teaching and the basically the love of teaching itself. That's what kind of looking at. If there aren't many experiences like this, then I have to say you guys have been fortunate, because in my lifetime I've met a good few people, and unfortunately it tends to be at higher levels of education, that I run across these individuals, especially in university. I met a lot of people yes, Jada. See your hand up.
So I remember I was in secondary school and I had this particular maths teacher.
Uh-huh.
And so she was, I wouldn't say that she was bad at the job. Like I could see her being a maths teacher, but her heart wasn't in teaching per se. Like every day was a bad day for her.
Wow, right.
Seriously, it
That's
was,
what I mean.
yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Somebody who is probably taking up a teaching position, not necessarily because they want to take up a teaching position, but it's the only thing that they can get. And that tends to happen a lot with math, unfortunately, because math teachers come from a wide variety of science-based subject areas that has a fair amount of mathematics in it. And I know, like, my nephew came across one of those in his teaching time, where this teacher was saying to the class, I don't need to be here, I can get a better job than this. And it's like, I don't want to be teaching
Yes,
maths here.
sir, that's exactly how she was.
Right. And she'd make those statements, and I'd be saying to myself, and I remember meeting her in a parent teacher situation. And I brought that to her attention, and she was unapologetic about the whole thing. She really, this is just a stepping stone for her. It's just a means for her to pay her loans back for, going to school. And so I said, well, really, you're not the type of teacher I would appreciate teaching my children, my nephew in this case. Um, and I mean, she hated me as a result of the comment I made, and I think she took it out on my nephew a bit in the class, and we had to do some other things to deal with the issues. I mean, he didn't have a problem with the mathematics; he just had a problem with the way in which she was doing what she was doing. It was really heart wrenching to watch him struggle with that. But fortunately, I was around to help him with that. But it is, and the problem with this is that if somebody doesn't like a subject area, or worse yet, they don't like teaching, they ought not to be in that profession. But unfortunately, there's no such what's the word I want to use? There's no such limitations placed upon people getting into teaching, in that form. Um, there's no guidelines that evaluates your teaching and then says, okay, listen, teaching is not for you. Choose another thing. And a lot of people get very comfortable teaching, and then after a while, so they may have started off with a high level of passion, but after a while they get bored, and their practice begins to get stale, and they disconnect again from their audiences, from their classes, by not really making any sort of significant change over their lifespan to be able to get these kind of things done. So it's something that you want to pay attention to. Most times, like all of these PowerPoints that I've been working, every semester when I use them, I evaluate them, I go through them and make changes, make adjustments, because I want to, stay fresh on. Oh, I didn't turn my camera on. Um, right. That's Mr. Lalchan coming back in. No, yes, she was here before. All right. So let's continue along because we do have a lot of slides to go through. All right. So at the end, Palmer argues that we need to synthesize, or we need a synthesis of all three components in the teaching process, and the same applies to the leadership process. And he's correct, at least from the perspective that I'm looking at here. Wow. All right. Moving forward. Right. Now, credibility. This is the being part. If you are credible, people will know it, and they will be quite willing to work with you. Now, credibility has a lot to do with your ability to demonstrate competence in the area of skills. Now, this is another thing that we could bring to teaching, but we could broaden the perception. So, if you're working in an environment, let's say you're working in an IT environment, and you're supposed to be skilled at particular activities, right? But as the leader of that particular group, you find yourself, less than able. You might see a situation where the people who working with you don't really trust you. Have any of you all encountered that circumstance? That you're working with somebody who's in a leadership position but really doesn't know what they're doing?
I've actually witnessed it when I was younger.
Right, that's
Um,
right. In what context?
in what context? Well, my aunt,
Yeah.
she was promoted into position, but she did not have leadership skills. And I could see people, ridiculing her when her back was turned and this kind of thing. And they were doing it in front of me, even though they knew that I was her niece.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
she was
Did you ever
eventually moved from the.
did you ever talk to her about it? Or
No,
let
no,
her?
I was young. I was a child.
Oh, okay. But out of the mouth of babes, right? That definitely
Yeah, but
that.
no, I didn't.
So, well, maybe her perception was also very, because she should have seen that kind of disregard that people had
Yeah,
for her.
I think she knew it was going on,
But
because you could tell when people are uncomfortable, but
yes.
she just kept moving on, and she didn't
Wow.
remain long in that position.
Well, that's a good thing because, um, unfortunately, maybe it allowed for a different opportunity. Let's put it that way. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, in like the public sector, we have this situation where people go into a position of authority, into a leadership position. They don't have the requisite competencies, and they pretend and make a mess of it. More importantly, and they can't seem to rally the troops basically to get things done. This also happens a lot when people try to pretend that they know what they're doing, and that's a really poor activity that I've found in a lot of instances, that because they want to get into these leadership positions. Remember in chapter 2 we talked about leadership positions being looked at as prized objectives. when people arrive in those positions of power, they have a tendency, especially if they really don't have the capacity to perform the jobs, and they don't have the competencies and the relative skills, they can find themselves in a situation where they are pretending to be, and unfortunately it will not, that pretense will be found out very very quickly, and that means that your credibility is shattered by doing things like that. So one needs to think carefully about saying, hey, I know what to do here, before you really start to, posit yourself in those kind of opportunities. Think about carefully, or have a different attitude towards knowing everything. All right, so that's another situation, which is one of the things that you want to look at. So there are four levels or different skills that you require as a leader: interpersonal skills, conceptual skills, technical skills, and tactical skills. What we're talking about so far in that last thing there is technical skills. This is the expertise that are required to hold that position that you're taking. That's an easy skill because that's really about qualifications and certification. The others are a little more critical. Interpersonal skills really speaking to your capacity for effective communication. And we know already how difficult that can be, especially if you're unwilling to listen to people effectively. So that's a skill by itself that has to be developed. Conceptualization skills is also a challenge because this is a habit, or I should say a mindset, that's kind of been beaten out of people in the past. Um, Being able to reconceptualize something from a new and different way, which is creative thinking, is something that our education system does not really encourage. Of late, I've seen some adjustments to that, but generally, our education system drums out creativity in children in particular. I remember one time I was drawing, we had an art class, and I drew this carnival costume. And it was a woman who was, I don't know, uh, I can't even remember clearly. I think the costume had to do with a deck of cards and stuff. And the lecturer looked at it and said, "Did this woman have no bottom? She had no breasts. You need to put." And I was like, "Really? Is it not? Is it the costume that needs the attention of the woman?" And that kind of like soured me in terms of that class. And I never bothered to take up that art class any serious more serious than that, because the first and only thing I heard from the lecturer concerned was just criticism, and very harsh criticism of that, very loudly too. So the whole class was laughing at you. And when you have that kind of thing taking place, whatever creativity you have is shattered. It's because you're ridiculed, and that's something we tend to do a lot in our society. We ridicule people for thinking differently, for doing things differently. That's a problem. But as a leader, it's something that we have to kind of get back in us. But most of you coming from a different system of education than the one I came from, hopefully your creative skills and creative juices are still there. I mean, I do creative things in other avenues, but they weren't related to schoolwork in a lot of instances. Now, one of the other critical issues that we have to take into consideration is tactical skills, and that has to do with negotiating, the development of good human relationships, and other skills needed to achieve your objectives. So that's like compromising, finding consensus, um, being more understanding and open. Those are the kind of tactical skills that we're talking about there in the development of good leadership practice. All right. This is part of understanding who you are. All right. This is part of the knowing bit, and you will realize in these four different areas, if you take an assessment or a stock list of your skill levels in this, you may see areas that, as from an individual perspective, you need to work on those things. So this is a good place for you to start your self analysis, is looking at your skills in these areas. Do you have sufficient um, technical skills? Are your conceptual skills, like myself, a bit hampered by um, past experiences? What are your interpersonal skills like, and do you have you been able to develop the skill tactics, the tactical skills for developing better relationships with other people? So again, it's never a one and done deal. It's a situation where you have to be constantly improving yourself over time. All right. So now the being element, as we talked about before, is knowing what you value most, and those values or ethical standards give you a sort of behavioral context. You will behave or act in a manner that you believe to be right, and that right or correct thinking is connected to your value structure. So again, evaluating you as an individual and your value structure starts to tell us whether or not you, as the individual doing the evaluation, may have the correct value structures that are required for the situation that you find yourselves in. Character gives you the courage to do what is right regardless of circumstances or consequences. And this is a really important thing here, meaning that your value structure is hard and fast. It's not one that wavers. It adjusts over time, you know, obviously, but it's not that you are just willing to give up a particular position that you hold as being critical and important. Um, so this is a fine kind of line thing that a lot of us have to pay attention to. Are my value structures fixed? No, I wouldn't say they're absolutely fixed. They will change over time, but they're not easily transitioned. Let's put it that way. It will take a fair amount of effort for your value structure to change in a worse yet in a negative way. But here we're looking at making changes for a positive outlook. So maybe you might be a bit too what's the word I want to use, a bit inflexible with certain things, and therefore sometimes that might be an element you need to look at in terms of developing some degree of flexibility when it comes to your willingness to listen to people outside the agreed upon definitions of individuals. So here I'm talking about being a little more open to people who are outside the ambit of who you consider to be good. So that's going to be some of the situations that you have to face up in terms of the being element. All right, the doing element, of course, is acting on your knowing and being, which is you have to work at getting what is necessary done. All right, you have to accomplish that vision that we talked about, the purpose and of the organization that you're getting into. So that doing part is kind of putting everything into practice and working towards the objectives of the organization, working towards the the goals that you have for the goals and the vision that you have for that organization. So that doing part is really the action part, but that action really tells us a little bit about, from somebody looking at you, that will tend to signal to me, if I were looking at your behavior and your decisions and the way in which were doing things as a leader, it will teach me about you in terms of who you are and what your values are. So when you look at how people do things as leaders, we kind of, without meaning to sometimes, learn about them. And if you pay attention to what you're doing, you can evaluate them in a great deal of detail by evaluating what they do. Now, some leaders have the inability to act because they're looking for perfection. Um, that is something that can stymie an organization, which means that you're a leader in an organization. You are meant to make some positive changes. You're meant to do something, but you're waiting on everything to be in place to get it done. Um, because you don't want to make mistakes. Now that is a dangerous thing for a lot of us to a dangerous activity that some leaders get into, because one, it means that you're unwilling to take risks, and it also says that you don't, because you don't take chances, you're not going to tolerate anybody else making mistakes. That's not a good thing, because um, it starts to teach everybody in the organization as a leader that you you don't allow anybody else to do anything if they're just a bit hesitant as to whether or not they're ready for it. So you're not taking chances, you're not tolerating any sort of mistakes, and therefore it stunts the overall learning potential. Now, I've actually worked under a leader like this, waiting for perfection, and we never did anything. As a result of waiting for that, we spent years of it, an organization in a holding pattern, and we did nothing. We took no chances. We weren't allowed to do certain things because nobody wanted to um, make a mistake given the circumstances we found ourselves in, and that was, it was demoralizing for the staff that was working in the organization, so much so that staff started to say, hey, I'm fed up with this, I leaving to look for a more um, more dynamic organization. Have any of you all ever experienced that? No? Yes? Maybe? Leaders who don't act because of perfection issues. Think about um, think about how you do anything in life. Do you expect that once you do it, you'll get it right the very first time, and you're gonna have to go back and check back on it? I don't think so. Um, think about it that way. All right. So in this situation, if you if you don't act in that manner, and you open yourself to taking sort of chances and seeing how things work, you're going to, as a leader, encourage a situation of learning. All right. That as a leader, you're gonna say to people, "Hey, let's take a chance, get this, try this, and see if it works. If it doesn't work, we're still gonna learn something from the process, and we're gonna be able to fine tune it and probably improve what we do next time around." That type of stuff. All right. So leaders promote learning in at least three ways. One, through their own learning, which means you show other people that you're engaged in improving yourself, either from a personal standpoint or from a technical standpoint or from any of the different skills the four skills that we were looking at there before. Two, by helping others to learn. So where you see gaps in your organization, reaching out to those individuals and say, hey, let me give you some an opportunity, or let me help you deal with this situation, and you deal with them from the position not of ridiculing them or anything like that. They say, okay, let me try and show you how to get this done, and let me teach you what's happening there. That's which is part of sharing your knowledge and sharing your intellect and sharing your skills. That way, you also empower them to make better decisions and also perform at a higher level or higher with higher skill levels, and by shaping and contributing to a culture that promotes learning. So, whatever you do in the organization to encourage people's learning generally is also going to help to create a culture in your organization of, we will be learning these things together. Um, Interestingly, one of the things that I've worked with leaders before who would come down to so they would engage external skilled people to come in and teach us about certain things, and they themselves would come into the classroom and join us as students in that classroom situation, learning those skills along the way. It was really an encouraging thing, because it meant that um, the leader would help us, encourage us by taking part in the learning process, and meaning that this is valuable, we are taking part in something meaningful, and it means that yes, we're going to be learning together, and means we're going to be trying things. If it doesn't work, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world kind of situation. That's something that happens in teaching practice, in terms of learning. about teaching and about developing a teaching skill. It's something that some heads of department and that kind of stuff could work on. Its application into other fields of action or work or maybe um, one of the places that this is going to be important is actually in community-based organizations, because people come to community-based organizations simply because they're in that community. Let's say you're living in a particular area, and people have, let's say they have a committee that's meeting based upon, whatever community issues that are coming up there. So security might be an issue. None of the individuals are coming into that organization are going to be especially skilled in anything. They will have their own skill sets, but would it be skill sets that are tuned to security planning, to fundraising activities, to um, managing children, whatever it is, whatever the goals of the organization are, you will have situations in which people are going to be a little, they're going to need you to help them to develop their own skills for those things. All right. So anybody has any examples of this that they have? No? Any of you all involved in community work?
Used to be so, but not anymore.
Um,
Nobody? Hold on.
I does you does being a member of the residents
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
association
about.
count?
Yeah, yeah. That's
Okay, well,
that.
yeah.
All right. Now, obviously, the only qualification to get into that position is what? Living in the area, right?
Yeah,
To be a resident, yeah. All
primarily.
right. So
Yeah.
obviously, they're going to be coming together without any particular set of skills. So, but some of the things, um, some of the things require some techniques or skills. Do you share those skills with other people? And the other part is, people willing to listen to you in the organization.
Well,
That's also a
no, they
challenge
do
for some of the,
require
for some people.
certain, professional competencies. Like they would like people to volunteer to do accounting, and they don't typically. At least we haven't had the situation where you know we don't have someone with those competencies who don't volunteer. So there are
Right.
certain things like that, but
Well, one of the things you
there's no sharing or
oh
teaching.
wow,
I don't
that
know.
that
I can't.
that's kind of a short,
Essentially,
but you
essentially,
can
you
under.
need to.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, essentially, you need to know what you're doing to volunteer for certain positions. They don't. There's a handover at the end, but that's that's the extent of it.
How long has that uh, community existed for?
I don't know. I can't give you a definitive number of years, but it's been a long time.
All right, but it appears to me as if maybe they can ex- expand their um, activities if they were to do some skill sharing and some training. Um, are they effective in what they do? But what is their goal though, as a resident organization?
Well, essentially, we coordinate certain activities in the community, such as security, and we um, maintain certain shared facilities like the playground, for instance. We do what we can
Right.
for roads and so on.
Okay. So it's like a gated community, right?
Yeah.
All right. So you're like a homeowners association,
Okay.
right? So do you all limit or regulate the way in which people can do certain things in their general areas of their property, not necessarily what's happening inside? Because I know,
No, we don't.
all right. So I know, like I've been familiar with one group that you could not paint your house any color. The color had to be approved from an approved listing of the homeowners association. You couldn't do you can't
No,
you
we
can't
don't
put
do that.
fences up in the front part of your home. You could only put fences up from the back wall of your house. They had a lot of regulations. Um, they also didn't want people putting certain decorations up during Christmas time. There was a whole host of regulations that place had, and I was kind of like, wow, this sounds really thing. But if you think about it, I mean, what is the likelihood that somebody who's an accountant or trained in accounts will always be available to be in your organization? Wouldn't it make sense to set up an accounting system and share the system knowledge in terms of how to maintain the system with other people in the organization? If the person who um, who was the expert at the time had to leave the
Mhm.
organization for one reason or the other, I mean, obviously we know
Well,
that.
they didn't seem to have an issue, as far as I am aware,
Uh-huh.
until now.
Oh,
We just switched over into QuickBooks, but we were basically just using Excel to maintain.
yeah, but even
And
with,
so, yes,
but
it's a bit of a learning process as, members doing the QuickBooks.
uh-huh.
And there is a core financial committee that, that oversees that.
You're
So
right.
there's a group of people overseeing that.
And that's important
But
because
I don't
each
want anything to do with it because I don't,
you
know anything about accounting or whatever.
really aren't you doing a management degree?
Yeah.
And did you do
Uh,
cost and
no, not a
management
degree,
accounting?
associate degree.
All right, but in
No, no,
that
no.
degree,
I'm just doing a
admin
business
program,
administration.
right? But in that you also did financial accounting.
Yes, but I
Aha.
don't want to be responsible for anybody's accounts.
I see. Unwilling to take on responsibilities. And
For
that's
that,
because,
yes.
yeah, and that's because you all get contributions on a monthly basis from each household, not so?
Yes.
And that's a hefty amount of money coming in, which has to be accounted for.
Yep.
Wow. Okay,
But
that's a
can
lot
I
of
just say that this is
uh-huh.
something that I avoided my entire working life. Huh? The
Why?
most I've done is petty cash.
Why? Yeah, and now
From
maybe
the
with this.
time I have
Okay.
interviewed for jobs and they say, well, you need to do accounting, and I said, no, I don't have accounting.
Right. So you have a fear of taking responsibility for money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I
That's
guess
some.
you could put it that way.
Yeah, but that's what it is. That's what it is.
Okay.
All right, Smikwan, you're going to have to confront that issue of yourself, for yourself, because who deals with your money? You,
I do. And I make
oh,
my mistakes along the way,
right?
but they're my mistakes with my money. But I will not put myself in
I
charge of
can't I
other
can't
people's
blame you
money.
because I can't blame you because I know the risk factors associated with making mistakes with other people's money is, or I should say, the consequences are pretty steep. But I would think your organization ought to be a little more open to having people trained within the organization to have more than one person with the development of their skills in those areas, uh, and not be running away from those responsibilities, because that's something that you're going to have to pay attention to in terms of your own personal development, I think. All right. Okay. So moving along, relational leadership is purposeful, meaning that the leadership that you get, the activities that you get involved with should have some positive purpose that you are willing to work on or work with or work towards. All right. And that brings me to another question. Do you have in the Miss Rollins, in that organization, do you all have a vision and mission statement?
To my knowledge, no.
Wow.
I think we have a motto,
Okay, that.
growing families together, but not a
What does that
vision
mean?
statement or mission
Mm,
statement.
okay. So in terms of the development of a community, a purposeful community group, that's too wide or broad uh, an idea to build an organization because that means they can literally get into and get focused on things that are not necessarily going to be for that function or that motto, so to speak. All right. But something for you all to think about, the development of a vision and mission statement for your community group is not a bad thing. It's for
Hmm.
ensuring that when you transition, that it is not driven by the individuals in the positions of authority in the organization, but it is driven by a collective agreed upon vision for the community. That's more enduring than an individual because people die eventually. Right?
No, but honestly, I think we do have a set of bylaws
Well, it should be in your bylaws, yeah.
that governs the
Activities of the
actions of
organization,
the group.
right?
Yes.
But incorporated in that in your articles of incorporation is their vision and mission
Hmm.
statement. You should probably find out.
No, to my knowledge, no. I
No,
don't
you
think
should
we
find
have
out
that.
though. You should make some
Well,
inquiries.
I could find out. Yes.
You should make some inquiries, right? Because look at this second thing here. Creating positive change means working hard towards resolving differences among participants, finding a common direction. Now, if you unaware what your directions are, then there's no resolving differences is a problem, right? Because you all haven't worked on building a shared vision to improve the community that you're in. That last part there, you understand the right. So I understand that maybe when this organization came together, it was a reflexive move by the community to protect themselves against what they saw as some sort of external threat. Correct? So given where you're working or where you're living or where the places thing, they felt as if in order to create a safe environment for families to live in and for children to develop in, it was a sort of reaction to making sure that you all can provide the security for that function. But and then of course because of the nature of these activities and you were receiving funds, you had to incorporate it and therefore create those documents. But you should track back into the creation of those documents and ensure that you all are doing something that is really focused on bettering the community. So maybe we can use yours as an example of where things are going right and wrong in that organization. But obviously, your focal points and your purpose is I don't think clearly defined. All right, so it's important that all group members will be able to articulate that purpose and use it as a driving force. So you understand now, as a member of that committee or that group, you're supposed to know these things. Something's not happening in that organization that is sharing and articulating the vision of that organization. That's a sign that it can be hijacked by people for different purposes, and that's a dangerous thing. All right. Um, and again, this is why we prefer, or this model prefers, that organizations are vision driven and not position driven. And that's because you have the situation of personalized vision and socialized vision. So let's understand when we're looking at vision what we're talking about. And there's a group that will be paying a lot of attention to that. Personalized vision refers to a person, usually the person with legitimate authority, announcing a dream or plan that is imposed upon others. So the emergence of any particular idea comes from somebody saying, hey, this is what I'd like to see us doing. When people accept that vision, then you have the genesis of a group coming together. Participants, however, will seem to have little choice and must adopt the vision of the individual and for the organization to move forward. This is especially something that takes place with businesses and business activities. So, family run or family owned businesses usually start from a personalized vision from the primary, or what they call the key person in the organization, key man or key woman, as the case might be. So, the other day, Mrs. Helen Bagwan Singh died, right? That entire company, Bagwan Singh's, had developed out of her effort and her vision. Now that she's absent, what happens? Now, in terms of driving that organization, keeping it going, is it just going to coast on its current activities and stay put, and it doesn't do the expansion that took place when she started that hardware situation?
Well, maybe they hold on to the values that she had.
Correct, but did she have a personalized vision, or did she have a vision at all, Justin?
Had to be if the business was so successful.
Not necessarily.
No?
Yeah. Think about Amara Group of Companies. You're familiar with that company?
Not in depth.
Amar? Okay. So Amar was a very profitable organization that was in charge of the sale. Well, initially they used to assemble cars here in Trinidad. You know that, right? Familiar with that, Justin?
Yeah.
Right. So Amar used to
Yeah.
assemble Toyota vehicles in Trinidad, and they were the sole representative of the Amar of Toyota International, and they were the sole supplier of Toyota vehicles here in Trinidad and Tobago, and in some of the other islands as well. Um, when the father died, he developed Toyota and all of the affiliate activities in terms of servicing and the branches all around the country and so on. But when the father died, he had accomplished an empire of activities, and the sons who took it over eventually crashed that entire thing. In fact, at the very end of it, Toyota came back and took the franchise away from Amar, and now the Toyota that you see in the same plant that that Amar had built in where's that place again? Bataria. You all know that Toyota area there, Toyota showroom.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was Amar's
Mhm.
building,
Yeah.
right? He built it and he had to give it all up as part of the thing because they owed so much money too. And that happened because of personalized vision. Now, I'm not saying personalized vision is a negative thing, but what the problem was, the vision that the old Mr. Amar had was personalized based upon what he saw the future moving to. Either he didn't, or the vision was not accepted by the other children in the company, and that ended up with the company, eventually dying over time frames. All right. Plus the sons had different things they wanted to do, um, and they ended up, kind of like fizzling out over time. All right. So socialized vision is a stronger way to develop that vision, which is building a vision from among the group members. Now, I'm not saying developing your own personal vision is not a good thing, but if you were to build the vision for your organization from a social approach, which means everybody gets an opportunity to have some input in the vision of the organization, it's going to be much better. Or you take your personalized vision and you socialize it, meaning that you get people to buy into it and improve upon your personal vision based upon their input. So that's something that a lot of, well, good organizations and the relational leadership um, model speaks to. You can't be the only person who has this vision, or else it's not going to go anywhere because you're not going to get the kind of support that you need from people to drive that vision moving forward. Sharing your vision doesn't mean that every person must create and possess a vision or be part of that, but each person must be involved in the process of helping to build that vision with other people around them. Now, when Costard started, are you all familiar with the vision and mission statement of Costard? No? Pretty
I'm
certain
aware
of.
of it.
To give all students a headache. No, that
That is not our vision. That's not our vision, nor is it our mission.
they're holding real true to that, innocent.
Huh?
I said they're holding true to that mission statement.
No, you're a radiologist student, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. That your program is one of the most challenging programs. You know that, right?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. Right. Okay. Right. What makes your program more challenging is not cost. That you know. What makes your program the most challenging? You don't know, or you're unwilling to see
Unwilling to say.
it. Okay. All right. Are you part of the Radiological Society?
No, sir.
Ah, okay. So you need to get to know your board. Th- Therein lies one of the critical issues that comes up with that. Anyway, but my point being is this. In the relational leadership model, we're saying that the stronger way to build the vision of any organization is from a socialized approach. Personalized visions can end with the death of the individual or the departure of the individual who creates a personal vision. A socialized vision is one in which you get other people to engage in it. And once we all share that vision, that is part of the process that helps to make it a stronger vision. All right. So effective leaders don't just impose their vision on others; they recruit others to a shared vision, which is what I hope um, Mrs. Bhagwan Singh would have done, especially in our digital age where power tends to coalesce around a particular idea and not a position. Leadership is a partnership, not a synergy. Now, that is really important for us to remember, especially now, because organizations, emerge very rapidly or can emerge very rapidly if you understand how to utilize the digital space around you and the digital social spaces around you. And there's no more of an excuse that you couldn't get other people's positions and points of view in order to develop a shared vision of where you want to take something in the future. Older organizations, much like what when Ms. Bagwin Singh and they started, and Amar group of companies and that kind of stuff, they started in an age where shared visions and that kind of stuff wasn't the end thing. Is you have a vision, so like Disney had a vision of where he would like to see animation and the world of adult entertainment go in terms of theme parks and that kind of stuff. And he started that idea, and others joined his vision and effected it. But that was an older methodology. Currently, remember we have a situation where we have a changed environment. Our changed environment doesn't allow for that kind of personalized vision to be as effective as others. Because if the person who whose vision it was dies, then that vision no longer is relevant to the people left around them. All right, so this is where you can see things taking place or being problematic. Now, again, we want to make sure that when we create the purpose of the organization or the vision of the organization, that it is one that is a positive vision. So it needs to be positive because that vision has to animate people. It has to empower people and it must transform people to want to go and do this. It must inspire, motivate. So vision and vision building is really an exercise in motivation. Um, when we started the exercise of building COSTAT, so COSTAT didn't exist in COSTAT came into existence legally in the year 2000. Prior to that, the organization was simply called the Community College of Trinidad and Tobago. Um, and that really started in the late 1990s, 1996, 97, around there, so 95, 96, 97, where there was a movement to kind of combine and standardize some of the activities that was going on in tertiary education outside of the University of Trinidad of the West Indies. In fact, the University of Trinidad and Tobago didn't even get into existence because during the process of creating COSTAT, the University of Trinidad and Tobago was also created alongside that. That came as a result of trying to have COSTAT as the central point of having too much training taking place. So UTT was created and pulled and separated out the hardcore engineering areas, mechanical, electrical, and so on, from the COSTAT training. And interestingly enough, COSTAT initially started with only supposed to be doing um, uh, diploma and associate degree training. We weren't really supposed to go into bachelor's degrees as well. But there was a gap in the market at that time that um, led to the development of our bachelor degree programs because there were specific degree programs that weren't being offered through the University of the West Indies at that time. So all of these things came up in and around the same time, but it started from a shared vision. The way in which the group, the vision and mission statement of COSTAT was developed was that each of the organizations involved and their employees and their staff basically were asked to contribute to from a departmental level to the development of the vision and mission statements for the entire organization. So it was a long process, a tiring process in some instances, but eventually the vision and mission statement was generated from the input of everybody. And when we say everybody, I literally mean everybody. At the time, I was working at the John Donaldson Technical Institute. We did the NEC programs there. For any of you who might remember NEC, and we did a lot of technical programs there. The exit point of that was the NEC examinations, where you would graduate with a technical diploma. So you had a craftsman diploma, a technical diploma, which was probably the highest level, and you also had something called a journeyman, which was in some of the areas. But it was a combination of a lot of different training, and that's why at the end of the day, UTT kind of took up the the heavy mechanical, technical, land surveying, civil engineering, those areas under their ambit, and the soft skill areas went to COSTAT primarily, but medical training stayed with us, which included radiology and the nursing, and dentistry also was supposed to come across as well, but there was a whole host of problems with dentistry as well that you're probably not aware of unless you did the dental program. But understand what was going on. At that point in time, we had to develop a vision that everybody had to buy into. And it was easy to set the UTT up because it was really easy to kind of piggyback on the development process that Costat had utilized to be able to move forward with that. Unfortunately, there was some fallout along the way, and of course, there was a lot of change that took place. But at the end of the day, a vision and mission statement helped us to drive towards what we were trying to accomplish in the future. All right, to be motivating, a vision has to be a source of self-esteem. So you have to be proud of the fact, as part of the organization, that these are the things that we're trying to do. That we were proud of our goals, our vision. So it was something that we wanted to work towards. That motivated to work towards. And this is what the relational leadership program or model is driving at. We need to, when getting involved in leadership positions, make sure that we are motivating people to, join with the organization for a positive thing. And we have to share that vision with other people. It's not sort of like uh, Ms. Rollins here. You have an organization that doesn't have a very clearly defined goal and objective. All right. So that's something that we have to pay attention to. So obviously, once we have that common goal, then we have that commonality that pulls us together in terms of what we're doing and how we're going to go about doing it, so that the change process that we have to engage in is something that we are all committed to. So at the start, we have to get people to connect with that vision statement, that mission statement, and that then helps us to move forward to get the process of changing it becomes much easier when you get people to buy into it. All right. So the relational leadership model supports positive change that improves the human condition and does not intentionally harm others. Unfortunately, sometimes some of the things we do, although for good, can also be for end up being negative. So that's something we have to pay attention to as well. All right. Um, when facilitating a positive change process, the means justifies the end. I'm not too clear, or I don't really agree too much with that statement, but it's there in the text. You want to look at it and see what they mean by that. The means justifies the end, which means sort of like, if for those of you who might remember, um, Malcolm X, by any means necessary. So the ends of his the organization that he was with, the goal that they were trying to achieve, was by any means necessary, kind of thing. So that was interesting. All right. Okay. So the concept here now is the same thing, that you're positive. The goals that you have to deal with have to be focused on making positive change. We're not looking at negative things. This is what the model is trying to make sure that we are intentionally trying to improve things. We are not trying to just change things for change process or for change purposes. We have evaluated what's taking place, and we are making these changes for the betterment of everybody. With with, of course, within reason. Now, um, some situations are profoundly hard to change. It's hard to move away from the way things are. Now, change theory is where we come in to deal with this now. One of the hardest things in any organization is to make change. And the process of making change, is usually a very painful and difficult process. Now, why is that? Change is not easy to make because we have grown accustomed to doing things in a particular way. And when we are told we have to change, the first response tends to be resistance. And breaking down that resistance is actually what they refer to as unfreezing. So in the change theory thing, the situation is you unfreeze a situation, make the change, and then freeze it back. Now, that unfreezing has to be caused by something. There must be some motivating factor or event that really creates it. So, for example, in Costa, we made a massive switch at the beginning of the pandemic. The trigger event being the lockdown of the country on the pandemic activities. If we didn't make the change, Costa would not exist today. So, regardless of what my friend says, Justin says here, if we didn't make these transitions into the online environment, especially in the quick manner that we did, the institution itself would not have been able to survive those changes. Now, consider the number of other organizations from a business point of view that no longer exist today because they were unable to make that rapid change. Um, and that's because in a lot of instances, some organizations have become so,
Excuse me.
yes, yes, hello?
I think you need to advance the slide, unless it's my screen that's still on slide number 18.
Yeah, I'm at slide 27. So you might need to refresh your page. Are
Oh,
other people
so it's
seeing
me.
that? Yeah, it
All right,
seems to
no
be you.
bother.
I'm
All right.
seeing slide 27, so
Yeah,
Um,
okay. It may be her
Uh,
her
okay,
system. Your system might be.
Mona Lisa is asking to be let in.
no problem.
Is she? Not seeing any. Not seeing anything here. I am not seeing anybody requesting entry at this point. I know. Did she send a message on the WhatsApp chat?
She sent a message to my chat.
All right. So I don't know. I don't think she's. All right. Here's somebody coming in. No, that's Melville. Not seeing Muna. Wait, Koyan, have you gotten your screen to update?
Um, well, yes, I'm seeing
Freezing and
it
unfreezing?
has updated. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm on slide number 27.
All right, that's where I came back in. All right, so well, hopefully, if when that person comes in, I will see um, the notification to bring her in. All right. Okay, so generally, the theory, change theory tells us about unfreezing a situation, making the change, and then refreezing it. But um, what more modern theories tell us is that instead of refreezing the situation, what we should do is kind of leave it slushy so that the newer organization will be more open to quicker changes in the future. So you're not going to create another frozen structure, this megalith type of organization that is really slow to change and make adjustments. Um, but you set up an organization that's a lot more flexible, that can make even more significant changes moving through the future, because a lot of the things that they talk about with change is the only constant thing in life. Everything changes all the time, whether you want to accept it or not. That's the reality, and that actually helps with a chaos environment, because if the environment is constantly changing, then we as an organization and as an individual, we need to be open to those changes regularly. All right, so that's what we talk about, that in terms of the change process. All right. So wherever we end up, what the models are telling us to do is we need to end up in a less rigid environment than we started in the past with. The process, however, for making that type of change is, of course, going to be time consuming, because oftentimes, and there's a group that's going to be looking at in terms of the last chapter, leading change. You're going to do this in a lot more detail. The when you make change, a lot of times along the way you're going to lose people, whether by their own choice or by having to cut them, because some people will make the change with you and will gladly come along. Other people will not be willing to make that change, and you would either have to cut them from your organization, or they will leave them on by themselves because they can't buy into the organizational changes that are coming. All right. So those are some of the fallouts that you're going to get, and one of the reasons why, and I hope the team remembers when they do their presentation to bring this up, is when we make changes, we are actually affecting something called the social contract that we have with the people in our organization. We are impacting negatively on almost unspoken agreements between ourselves and the organization. Um, it's sort of like well, sort of like you get paid, you get this, you get so on, and I'm expected to do X, Y, Z. When I say, okay, now we need to do X, Y, Z, and ABC, that changes the social contract that I now have. And if I'm making those changes, I need to justify why I'm saying you need to do X, Y, Z, and ABC as well. Here comes Mona Lisa. Welcome back, Mona.
Thanks, sir. I just have some internet issues.
Yeah, it's happening. I know. All right, no worries. Okay, so we understand this whole issue about the social compact that we have with individuals in the organization. When we make changes, we negatively impact upon that, and sometimes we find ourselves having fallout, and we have to pay attention to that and be aware of that when we engaging in change-based activities. Um, but the idea is that we ought not to get accustomed to anything over time, because change is something that is constantly going to be um, part of the organizational's mindset. And in fact, we should always be looking to make changes. Your vision and mission statements should encourage change thinking as well. That's something that we should be dealing with as well. Now, second element, relational leadership is inclusive in nature. Now, inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group's activity. So, this is probably one of the most challenging aspects of this model. The model says that we need to be inclusive. And this is what they mean by being inclusive, that we understand and value and actively engage diversity, different approaches to everything in life. This is by far going to be one of the biggest challenges that faces any modern leader in our environment, especially as a lot of these issues have become um, even more problematic in light of how people are responding to it. So hey, we're talking the full gamut here of people who are um, maybe gender phobic, or I should say, what have different sexual orientations, people who have phobias against people who are in any one form of the other than being male female. So this whole thing of male female cisgen um, binary, this is becoming a real issue in more developed nations. It's a problem here in Trinidad as well, because us dealing with people who have different sexual orientations, or openly non-gender specific, or males who are more feminine in nature, that type of stuff. Those things create a lot of trouble for us, because we are only looking at them through the lens of what we are accustomed to be seeing. The challenge as a leader is to be inclusive to all of these folks, all of these people, all of these ideas. And the reason for that is because those varying perspectives strengthens your group, because we are looking at, or we are opening ourselves to look at the activities or the alternate views of life in those particular circumstances or situations. That's something that strengthens an organization by being inclusive. Now, a lot of people don't see this. This is a big challenge for a lot of things. A lot of organizations, faith-based organizations, suffer from this a lot as well, having a limited, because by the way in which it's designed or set up, it's already exclusive in nature. Um, in that it's only open to people who are of a similar belief structure. So that's something that we have to treat with as well. But when you're dealing with bigger societal um, communities that you're going to get involved with, which we have complex organizations and communities, another chapter that's going to be dealt with in more detail. The challenge of being inclusive in environments where people are directly on in conflict with the types of individuals you're getting involved with, it creates problems. I had a friend of mine's. He was he and his wife were working in Canada, and they're very staunch Roman Catholic um, people in their belief structure. And the wife was working in an office with an openly gay woman, and on her desk and her screensaver, she would have things that provoked the the living daylights out of my friend's wife. And eventually, she filed a complaint against her in HR. That she and HR, kind of had to tell her, listen, the policy is that they had to be. Now, this is in Canada, guys. So Canada is probably one of the most um, tolerant countries in the world when it comes to gender fluid situations. And in fact, she ended up, my friend's wife got warned that she cannot encroach upon this person's freedom of expression and freedom of sexual orientation and that type of stuff. She got, and again, that was a challenge, and it's a challenge for other people who have um, very firm value structures based around sexuality and the traditional views of family life and so on. Those things are avenues for a lot of conflict. And eventually, my friend's wife left the organization because she couldn't tolerate that particular type of lifestyle around her. As a leader, where are you going to be sitting in terms of this? Because far too often we find ourselves being exclusive to the point that we leave out people who might have brought into the organization a perspective that is will empower us, make us better prepared for the future that we're actually surviving on or living in or existing in. Um, I don't know how many of you all honestly think you would have problems like that if you were working or living or in an organization where you were confronted with these types of or other types. I'm just describing the one here, but there are other types of variety or differences that would create problems for you. How many people here, from an honest standpoint, would have an issue working with openly gay individuals or openly transsexual individuals or that type of stuff? Mm,
I
no.
I think that the issue for me, especially when I look at what's going on in the States, is this move to Russian and change society's perspective. I mean, for
Uh-huh.
generations, we've been going with an
Yeah.
idea and
Hmm.
a description,
Yeah. Male and female.
and what you're saying exactly. And there are people who are now rushing in and they want to kind of enforce that. I don't like that kind of attitude. So I think I would have a problem from
Yeah,
that
you and
perspective.
and and if other people in class are honest, they would probably also indicate that they would have a challenge with that. And I'm not saying no, that trying, and in fact, what I've been seeing too on in and around and looking at some of the things is that because there's this high level of awareness among that community, it means that anybody who interacts with them is prone to make mistakes about, like, that's like sort of going to somebody and saying and calling them a him when they said their pronoun is a they. And I don't get some of these pronouns that people decided that they prefer to be called. So now the phrase of what's your pronoun is a legit thing. You have to find out from people. How should I reference you? Um, and when you make those statements, they start to categorize you. Want them? Oh, you're a cis male, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and it's taken me a long while to understand what the hell's a cis meal. Anybody willing to explain that? Or cis female? What is that? Anybody knows what I'm talking about? No, Miss Rollins, you can't be the only person as an
I've heard
expert in
it.
this. Yeah, you heard it, but
I'm
what does
sorry.
it
No, I'm
mean?
not an expert. No, I can't describe what a um,
Cis,
exactly what they
cisgendered
mean
individual
by
means.
that. But I mean, I've heard the descriptions, and I think it's ridiculous.
I don't
And
know.
that's all I have to say about it. I don't know if I'm going to be as open
To somebody like
where
that.
that is concerned.
Okay.
Yeah, because that sort of thing belongs in your family. If you have a group of people who embrace you and want to do those things with you,
Uh huh.
refer you by a special gender and all, but you can't,
We
want
can't expect that
at
society
the
will be willing
gender,
to work with us.
they don't agree with you. It's ridiculous.
Well, the problem with
I
that
don't
is
know.
that,
I don't know.
yeah, the problem with that outlook, however, is that the that is the problem because once in the family it begins to be an accepted norm, then eventually it comes out into the wider environment. So you find in the workplace in particular is where the challenge comes up. And if if you as the leader become what's the word I want to use, resistant to those particular changes or those particular individuals, then you're going to find yourself being ostracized by other people who find your reaction to somebody who is not following the standard protocols that existed in the past. They may start to find that we don't want anything to do with you because you seem to be very intolerant of the differences that are around us. And this is only with gender and sexual orientation. Well, gender and sexual orientation, but they're different things. But here we're also talking about um, all the things like ethnic groupings, um, ageism is another element that has to be dealt with or dealt with from this perspective as well. These are issues that are going to challenge you to be inclusive, and that inclusivity is going to be one of the bigger challenges that a lot of people are going to have to work on in developing in their skill levels, because you have your own biases, and you need to understand those biases. So Ms. Rollins, you talking about the challenge that you have, it means again there is something here that you need to probably investigate about yourself and understand maybe why you're having those types of issues and what you can do to be a bit more open, and that is a process that takes
Well, I
time.
can tell you why I'm having it because I don't like being bullied, and it
Re-
just feels
it comes across as
like
being bullying in
bullying.
some
I mean, it hasn't
instances, yeah.
reached Trinidad and Tobago as yet. For the most part, we're very traditional,
Uh-huh.
and thank God it's not here as yet to that extent. But I mean, I'm looking at videos coming out of the states, and it's just
Uh,
bullying. They're
yeah,
bullying people,
yeah,
and
it does appear
I
that way.
don't see,
It
I
does
don't
appear that,
see
yeah. Go, go ahead, go ahead.
how I can put up with that kind of behavior.
True. Well, I can understand the bullying element that you're talking about. But at the end of the day, what happens when, even if the person that comes to you is not bullying in that sense, but that they tell you, listen, I identify as so and so. Um, but they're not telling you that you have to, but they're just letting you know. How do you treat with them? That's
Okay,
a
well, on a
say the,
one-on-one perspective, I will try to accommodate a person. If that is what they want, I will do it. But
right.
if each and every individual, if it becomes that way, where each and every individual, after I learn your name, I also have to remember whether you prefer a particular gender. That's not making sense. We kind
Well,
of have to come to a
because
common agreement.
all right, I understand you. I understand you, and you understand that that inclusivity issue is going to be something that you would have to work on.
Well, I suppose so. But
Yeah,
all I can
because
tell
no,
you is that
I'm
thank
not
God
saying
I'm not here yet.
I'm not saying you have to accept anybody's position in terms of that. But what I'm saying, it's an element that you yourself recognizing your own limitations in that area, and you know that, because I'm certain you're not the only person in the classroom that has or may have, not saying that they have, but may have issues treating with individuals, especially if they're coming to you in a very aggressive manner, and being bullied and that type of stuff. All right, but outright just simply outright just ignoring people and telling them they're talking rubbish and stuff is even more disrespectful as well. Because ours is the only culture that really, well, I should say, ours is one of the generalized cultures that look at gender as being male and female. There are other cultures outside there that have different genders beyond male and female, huh? And that you could look for too, but they tend to be
Yes,
more peripheral.
it's okay. Yeah,
All right, that don't
I'm aware of that.
right. Okay, so we need to understand that these ideas that are confronting us now in the modern situation they're not unique. They have existed in time before, and what starts off in one instance as being different eventually becomes over time more acceptable in different things, or different circumstances. So I'm not saying you're going to have to change your value structure, but it may mean that we're going to have to treat with our attitudes towards these variations or these differences, and be possibly more inclusive, or willing to listen to those individuals over time. All right, now why is this important? Because we need to get past the differences so that we can see the similarities, and that is one of the biggest challenges that we have to look at. As I think it's Maya Angelou. She said, "We are more alike than we are different." That's something that you need to look at as well, because when we start to include people with different perspectives in the world around us, we we can't help but broaden the perception of the entire group. Now, the way in which other people who walk those particular lines of life look at the world around us is uniquely different to the way we look at things from our perspective. And that variation in perspective will allow us to approach issues and problems with a broader, or greater, a greater vision, or broader focus than we would have had if we only looked at it with people with like-mindedness. So, leading others to lead themselves is key to tapping the intelligence, the spirit and creativity, the commitment, and most of all, the tremendous unique potential of each individual. That's what we're trying to do when we're being more inclusive. Now, getting past the differences, we are all trying to work towards one particular goal. Once we're in this organization together, and that inclusivity means we don't belittle their contributions, because it's sort of like when you're in an organization and you have young people in the organization. A lot of times, the older generation or the older members of the organization look upon the younger ones and say, hey, your ideas are, you need to sit down and wait for a little bit until you could, step up to the big boys table. But one of the problems with utilizing that approach is that we're not giving voice to a perception outside there of what the world is like to that individual, to filter into the decision making of the organization. There are lots of companies, for example, that failed because they were unwilling to take into account the changing environment and changing perspective of what was taking place around them. IBM is one of those companies. IBM and Xerox, they were two companies that did not recognize the importance of software development and really focused their attention on the machines themselves. And as a result, they lost a lot out. They lost a lot when the software revolution really takes place. The platform or the physical platform that you're working on is not as critical as the why is this coming up? All right, so the important element here is that we need to involve other people so to have their perspectives, their influences, their experiences strengthen ours and broaden our activities. So that's in the nature of what inclusivity is. And I think we've actually engaged in a good discussion here about um, why it's important, because we could see from a lot of things here that um, we can have some serious problems. Now, when we have a diverse group in front of us, once let's say we get into that situation, um, will we utilize a technique like consensus building or voting to make decisions? So obviously, at some point in time, we have to make decisions. What is the best method for making that decision? Consensus models, or do we use democratic models? So a lot of people, a lot of organizations choose to utilize democratic situations, which means one person, one vote. The idea with the biggest vote, or the greatest votes, or the greatest number of supporters, will in fact be the decision that you're going to take. But a more superior approach to making a final decision in anything is the consensus model. Um, and consensus means that although you may disagree in part or in whole with a particular idea, you agree to support that idea despite the fact that you weren't you're not with it in the first instance. That is uh, because in the democratic model it means that if you have a group of 10 people and 6 people voted for an idea, then 4 people automatically say, well, I'm not doing anything to help this particular idea move forward. They just resign themselves to not do anything about it. A consensus model, on the other hand, means that the 6 people who agree with the idea help to make the others understand why they believe that particular idea or approach is going to be a better approach, and gets enough support from them to work towards that outcome, utilizing the approach that was suggested in the first instance. That's what makes consensus a, a better tool to work with, but it requires a lot more time, because it's going to take time for you to convince people and work with them. And maybe even during that process of consensus building, you may modify the initial decision or method that you've selected in the first instance to include some of the challenges that these 4 people are seeing from the 10, so that you find some sort of middle ground, or as we talked about in the chaos theory, you find the partial solutions from different from 7 or 8 different wrong answers. You find a partial solution from everybody that filters into that. Now, inclusivity also extends beyond the actual group. You also have to include the people who are directly impacted by your activities, those external to your group, as well as those who have a vested interest in your group activities or group actions. So that means you have to broaden your inclusivity to factor in shareholders and stakeholders that are external to the group activities. So if we go back to um, Miss Rollins here and her home, the what do you call that? The the the, the organization, the homeowners association that she has. Sorry. Um, what are some of the stakeholders around? So some of the stakeholders might be the security company that they're utilizing to provide the security. Um, The the other stakeholders can be the families themselves. Obviously, they are direct, but they're not part of the group. But the families and children who are impacted by the decisions that you're making, and you're also dealing with the contractors who are coming to do the work that you're dealing with. Maybe you're installing cameras in it, you're setting up some sort of centralized monitoring system, that type of stuff. Those are things that you also have to consider. What are their positions and point of views when making a decision? So you factor in again the individuals outside of the immediate group to be part of the decision making process. So again, that requires a little more inclusivity as well. So it's not only within the group that we have to look at, but without the group or outside of the group as well. So those are things that we have to pay attention to. In fact, whenever COSTAT is making any changes to any of the programs, they have to include, because of the design factor, the major stakeholders and shareholders of the program that we're looking at, which may or may not include the, like in the case of Justin's program, the the board, the medical board that is entrusted with the training of these types of individuals, and the whole occupation of radiology and medical thing. We also have the government that is part and parcel of that too, because they are the employers or key employers. Plus, you also have representatives from the private sector. Um, all of those people play a part of the stakeholders and shareholders, and therefore, when we're having program change committee meetings, they have to be part and parcel of that to help guide the decision making process, because at the end of the day, if you're designing a program, it has to meet the need of the many audiences that you're trying to treat with, not just the students, but the people who will employ students. Are particularly critical to look at in terms of designing the program of study. All right. Okay, so we can agree with this whole concept of stakeholder involvement and different methodologies that are utilized for this, because if you get external support for the activities of your group, it actually helps with making the group work better, the organization work better across the board. Now, this is another table here that's looking at the the sort of ranges of responses from stakeholders. Let me make this a little smaller so that you can see all of it in terms of the. All right. So you have perspectives or stands on the issue on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have degree of importance to the stakeholder. All right. And so therefore you have these four zones that you want to get everybody into being supportive, but you have to understand that for some stakeholders, the concept or the thing that you're dealing with is low priority to them. So that means it's they have, it affects high support areas, but it is of low importance. So that makes it low priority. This area here problematic is high levels of opposition but low importance. That's problematic because are you going to get people to commit one way or the other? Then highly antagonistic is it's highly important, and therefore there's a high level of opposition to it. That's going to be important for you to already recognize, because those are the people that you have to kind of get into the other zone, which is high level of support and high importance. Those are the people who act the quickest in terms of moving forward with the activity. So this is again for you as a leader to kind of categorize your external stakeholders and shareholders to this activity. So it's a way for you to be able to manage and know how to work with those individuals moving forward. All right, so now we move on to relational leadership is empowering. It's empowering in the sense that we need people in our organizations to be capable and willing to take over the organization when you leave, in essence. That cannot happen if you are holding all of the decision making to yourself, all of the skills to yourself, and you're not preparing for succession moving forward. So empowerment has two dimensions: the sense of self that claims ownership and claims a place in the process and expects to be involved. That means we want to create individuals, or we want to cultivate individuals in the organization who feel a sense of, this is my organization, I have a place in this, and I expect that I am going to be involved. That form of, that type of thinking from the individual. And the second element is we have to create the environment that promotes this particular level of involvement and reduce barriers that would prevent that sort of involvement, especially if we're trying to get people with the specific skill sets, energy levels, and ideas to come and get involved. So, two elements. One, we have to create the mindset of ownership. Two, we have to create that environment that encourages it. So, those are the two things that we have to work on across the board when we're talking about empowerment across the board. All right. And so, that empowerment element that we're speaking of here is going to be something that is is critical, because you as the leader have to spend a lot of time ensuring that you are giving over opportunities and skill training to get people to be empowered. Because if they're not, if you don't do those things to encourage it, you're going to have a sort of maybe yes men or sheep who just running around doing what you tell them to do, but they're not going to know why. They're not going to feel committed to it. And when and if you leave the organization, or the organization transitions to a new leader, they're going to have the problem of people being disengaged. All right. So it means that if you empower the people, you strengthen the organization by having more people who go to bat for you. In other words, they're going to be able to defend the organization and what it's doing, because in the world around us, lots of people may object to what you're doing. And if you don't have other people who are just as thoughtful, powerful, and skilled in doing what you're doing, in terms of where your organization is going, this can be problematic across the board. So it's something that you want to pay attention to. Empowering environments are learning environments, which means that we allow as leaders that we will accept that there will, off in the process of empowering other people, we're giving them the opportunities to take chances and to learn from mistakes. We have to be, as a leader, we have to be willing to allow for that, because if we don't, then we're not creating the type of environment in which we will be willing to empower people. Because again, nobody does anything right or correct the first time around. We need the opportunity to make mistakes, learn from our mistakes, and move forward. It's sort of like the fear that Miss Rollins has about getting involved with accounting for the money of the organization that she spoke about. That is a debilitating fear, because it's preventing her willingness to participate in that type of activity. Maybe there's something in the environment that is not promoting that feeling of willingness to take risks. That's an interesting thing about the organization, or something. All right, so when we look at the word empowerment, the base word is power. And when we look at power, there are a number of different issues that come with that. There is a group that's going to look at power and influence in more detail, and therefore you're going to be seeing some of this here be repeated. So traditionally, power is zero sum, meaning that it's all or nothing. And that's the conventional approach to power. Most people coming from that background always see that leaders must have absolute power, and they cannot share that power with anybody else. In fact, if you ever give off power or give power to other people, it's seen as weakness, and that weakness is dangerous. All right. So um, that's something that you also have to look at changing as well. Power is not lost when you give over to other people. In fact, your power increases, and we'll see that in a little bit. Now, power dynamics range from power over, which is the autocratic, to power with, which is collaborative approaches, to power alongside, where we're dealing with collegial approaches or colleagues in an organization. So you have the over, the with, the alongside. You improve or increase your power if you utilize more collaborative approaches and collegial approaches. Power over is the sort of like I'm in charge kind of situation, but there are different um, things that you're going to take from that. What approach appeals to you most? Is it that you like the authoritative power, or would you embrace and encourage more collegial and collaborative approaches to the use of your power? Now, as I said before, a lot of people view the all or nothing approach. I have all the power, you have none. That's the traditional approach to power brokering, and that is problematic in the sense that when you use that approach, you don't empower the people. In fact, you discourage other people, and that empowerment factor is kind of, you know, gone with the wind kind of situation. So, the model that we're talking about here is that we need to share our power, that other people in the group have to have the opportunity to utilize or engage with some of that power and move on. Now, there are a couple sources for power, and how people respond to the power is another element that you're going to look at. So these bases of social power are expert power, referent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. Now, expert power comes from you being an expert at something. So you're a whiz at IT, you're a whiz at, whatever skill areas. Those skills give you expertise. That expertise gives you power because everybody will defer to you as the expert in the field. Referent power is a little different. Referent power is power that is ascribed to an individual because of not only their expertise, but also the fact that they're sort of like a wise person in the organization who's been around for a while, and they are afforded that reverence by other individuals by saying, hey, the length of time this person been there, the quality of their practice and thing, they are given that type of reverence by other members of the group because of the the type of things that they've done in the past, and maybe they have some sort of reputation that gives them that reverence from other younger members of the organization. That's another source of where power comes from. Legitimate power is the power that your position gives you, and that is the so if you're the supervisor, then there's a legitimate amount of power that you're given. If you're the CEO, so on, that type of stuff. That power gives you the opportunity to exercise the next two powers, interestingly enough, which is coercive power. That is power to punish people. Coercive power. So parents have coercive power because they are parents. That allows them to administer punishment. And that punishment in itself is a way in which you can exercise your power. But in an organization, coercive power may be not like parents, but like a boss who would fire you or demote you or remove bonuses, that type of stuff. Reward power is the opposite of that, which is, again, in your legitimate position as the leader of the organization, you can reward people for doing good jobs, or the coercive side of that would be to remove or deny a reward. So reward power is more the motivational approach to things in terms of power. Coercive is the punishment area so again, using those types of powers, however, can be dangerous because you can find yourself getting um, so I've already described all of these things here. So coercive power is not something that you want to utilize very often, if at all, because it's sort of like a zero sum type of activity. So it's something that you may want to be very sparingly approach. But sometimes you have to, just letting you know that. Sometimes you do have to um, utilize your power for correction. All right. So when we talked about reward power, this is the ability to deliver positive outcomes. So these may be both intrinsic and extrinsic. So like raises, plaques, special bonuses, that type of stuff. Intrinsic would be those things that you can't see, obviously, like praise and support, and they make you out kind of thing, you know, kind of is a good thing. All right, so some of these sources may apply to you as the leader, um, but oftentimes you actually have to do some work to get at that, especially your expertise. That's something you can actually work on. Um, um, Conversely, others may attribute some source of power to you without your knowing. Now this happens sometimes in organizations where you don't really know the person, but based upon what you've seen them doing, you start to ascribe to that person powers they don't really have. Now, this is oftentimes happens because of assumed skills based upon somebody's titling. So, for example, some of you in this class are there's a couple of communication students here. I think one or two communications and mass comm. And therefore, we may think that they are really good with language and writing and stuff like that, and that may not be true. So we've ascribed to them power that is not real, or at least is not necessarily going to be true. So that's something you have to be aware of, that sometimes that happens when you're dealing with ascribing power. All right. So as we continue moving, we need to understand what power does and how we use it, and the impact of using your power. And as I said before, there's one chapter presentation on power and influence from the DAF that's going to go into nice details about this. So this is what we're talking about: ascribing somebody power without really thinking about it. Because when you're in a group and you assume that because you're a English major, you should be the best at writing, that could be done in an error, because maybe you're the English major because you need help with your writing to begin with. All right. Power is not a finite thing. It's something that can be shared. Now, again, we talked about this before. The the old paradigm that exists when it comes to power is that power is something that you have to hold on to and not give up. Whereas the new paradigm is that power is something that we should be willing to share. Because as you empower others, it improves the vision of it improves your view in the world around you in terms of the organization, and people ascribe to you more legitimate power and more reverent power when you give up your own power to make other people better in the organization. I've actually experienced this myself in terms of a technique that I utilized when I ran a particular department, and I would be allowing or giving more power over to the the members of who are under me, and I used to always tell them, listen, my job here is to make myself irrelevant. So the more I give over to you guys, the more access, the more independent you're able to make decisions and so on, the less you're going to need me in your day-to-day activities to get things done in the organization. And I remember my boss had a problem with why when I was doing that, because they believed from the old school thinking or mentality that I needed to make sure that I held or centralized the decision making process so that we wouldn't encounter issues. And I always found that was very negative in its outlook, because you needed to have more people in the organization who are capable and confident enough to make appropriate decisions, and not centralizing decision making around one or two individuals in an organization. That led to a lot of conflict between myself and my own superior. Um, but I know the people around really appreciated getting the ability or the chance to share in the activities and learn more about the organization, and get that kind of power for themselves. But again, a lot of the old school members of an organization can negate against this empowerment system, and that's something that if you are really thinking about, you're going to have to go to bat, especially if you're in an old school, almost what's what I want to use, public sector oriented place. There's a tendency for that, even in these places as well. You have that situation, private sector, especially where there's a lot of there's a lot of um, what's the word I want to use, a lot of status attached to holding those position of power. It may mean that somebody be really really willing to hold everybody else out of it. That kind of stuff. One of the things we have to encourage too in empowerment, not only in creating the environment, is to encourage people to be self-empowering, which that they can in fact seek power and seek empowerment by training, by taking it upon themselves to learn something in the organization, taking it upon themselves, taking initiative to do things. um, and then we used to say, what was it, um, uh, make a decision, do it, and then look for apologies after the fact, that kind of stuff. Self-empowerment means that we also encourage, through our empowerment activities as a leader, we encourage other people to want to improve themselves and to become better at what you're doing. So methods for doing that sort of empowerment: education. All right, that's one of the ways for self-empowerment. Taking opportunities to take leadership positions in smaller, not necessarily the higher levels, but taking the opportunity to take lead in a team or a group, that type of stuff. Structuring, which means creating sort of um, the structures, and what was the word? Structures such as arranging a day, bringing people to the table, changing policies or processes so that the changed lives beyond the people who create it. So means structuring your life in such a way, structuring your work activities in such a way that you are able to empower yourself to be able to get the opportunities to experience these situations of power, as well as accessing the education and sharing of power. Now, providing opportunities for others to be able to do that, making sure that you have resources that are available to make sure that other people get their job done, mentoring the people around you to um, help them understand themselves better and so on, and actualization, taking on the opportunities and taking charge of them. That's how you're going to be going to do your self empowerment elements. All right. So as I said, self empowerment is important because we need to pay attention to all of the people in the organization, because as a leader we have to empower everybody, and we have to, because of these particular things here: mattering and marginality. Sorry. So we want all of the people in the organization, or as many as possible in the group, to feel as if what they do and what they feel and what they say matters. If they don't feel as if it matters, then we are marginalizing them. And people who are marginalized will have a tendency to ignore what's taking place and not offer support. So, one of the things that we're going to have to do is to pay attention to those people on the margin. Because you may enter an organization, let's say you arrive in an organization or you arrive in a job, and you get promoted into a position of power, leadership. You're going to find that there are people in the organization that you're going to meet in the margins. Your job is to make them feel, and actually not make them feel, but make them matter, because their positions in the organization may not be seen as being actually very critical, but other people, without them, you'll be surprised what happens. One of the things that I've seen in terms of mattering and marginalization, or is unfortunately, it's how we position or what we think about certain types of jobs. This is something that custodial staff tends to suffer with a lot. A lot of organizations marginalize the custodial staff. In fact, some people are really, really bad about it. They're very what's the word I want to use? Dismissive of custodial people, and to the point that they would scorn them. And that's a really horrible way to treat another human being, especially since the job that they're doing is probably one that is absolutely disgusting, because they're dealing with the nastiest parts of the organization. And your behavior with those individuals really speaks volumes about you as an individual. I remember, for example, I went to a function. We had a formal function in the organization, and we were seated in particular tables. And on this table, we had I had the fortunate thing. I met a number of ladies. I didn't recognize a lot of them because, again, in a formal instance, you get dressed up, right? Suit and tie and formal dress wear and so on. And I didn't recognize that. This lady looks very familiar. So I was very curious to find out who she was and stuff. And then I was finding out about these things, and I realized she was the custodial person from a particular floor, who a floor that I didn't really, I wasn't very active in. But I remember the reaction to one of my colleagues who was sitting on the same table was to immediately feel a bit put off by the fact that they were sitting at a table with custodial staff, and proceeded to say, "Hey, listen, I need to go and check my friends on this table." And that was really horrible. That reaction was, it spoke to a lot. It spoke a lot about their particular mindset in terms of, you know, the 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 idea that I can't be seen with these kind of people because they make me appear to be less. It's really strange, really, really strange behavior, very negative behavior, because that makes people feel even worse in terms of being marginalized. And I remember the person made the comment. He said, "No, no, it's okay if you all need to get up and go, because I know people don't like to already line with us at these events." And I said, "Oh, wow, this is a." Even they were aware of the responsiveness of staff to their position in the organization, which is horrible in relation to, because all we do is we see them as cleaners or maids and that type of stuff. We don't see them as people first. So that's a thing about that. You can't empower somebody if you marginalize them. They have to matter. And trust me, if cleaners decide to stop working, you could really hurt an organization like that. All right. Okay. So we talked about the empowerment in environments. Let's see if there's anything here new that we didn't talk about. Right. So making sure that you have a good space for taking chances, learning on the job, that type of stuff. Knowing that if you make a mistake, you're not going to be made fun of, you're not going to be um, ridiculed or punished from by making that those types of decisions. All right. Some organizations don't tolerate this at all. It's something that their leadership does not want happening. And that's a sad thing, because it means that you're basically marginalizing more people by saying, okay, listen, you can only do it if you know what you're doing. Don't do it if you don't know what you're doing. Again, the whole point about that is how do you become more skilled at something if not by trying to treat with it? That's a really it's kind of circular thinking, but at the same time, if you develop a leadership style in which you don't um, allow for errors and mistakes, then you're likely to create that type of marginalization that takes place of the people, and more importantly, you end up in an environment where you don't encourage empowerment. You just want people to follow what you say to them, that type of stuff. One of the ways in which this can go wrong is through delegation. So delegation is not empowerment. You are simply handing over your tasks to somebody else to get done. Now, a lot of people do this to set people up because they oftentimes delegate a responsibility to somebody, and don't give them sufficient tools to be able to perform their job. And that actually can lead to a situation where the person feels, the phrases I hear, feel manipulated, underprepared, resentful, and victimized. And that's a really important thing. You don't want to do that if you're going to delegate. Not, and interestingly enough, even when you delegate, the final responsibility lies with you. But the idea is that some leaders utilize delegation as a way to make out or make it appear as if this person is not prepared for the job. In fact, when your delegate fails to perform, the responsibility or the of the failure is not really theirs, but more uh, it's more going to tell a picture of your inability to provide enough support to your employee or your subordinate to get the job done. Because delegating without paying attention to what they're doing and whether they're doing it right, that is clearly your responsibility. You need to delegate, but take responsibility for what's taking place. And at the end of the day, that's the truth. Even though you delegate, at the end of the day, the responsibility of getting this particular job done or task completed is yours, not theirs. Because yours, that is your particular thing. Now, we come to one of the most critical elements of the relational leadership model, which is being ethical. It The model emphasizes the ethical values of the leadership of leaders in this model. Be Again, the model really focuses a lot of attention on the development of leadership values and standards, and that's really going to be a big stumbling block. All right. The language you use to examine ethical moral leadership is of the utmost importance. Some have a tendency to use terms like ethics and morals interchangeably. Others differentiate between them, yet draw a strong relationship between ethics and morals. Ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules concerning right and wrong. Now, that is. Hold a minute, guys. All right, sorry about that, guys. Just had a bit of a interruption there. All right, so um, all right, so we looked at this. Right, so yeah, we're talking about these rules, ethical rules, that govern our conduct, especially the ultimate rules concerning what is wrong and right. That's what ethics is all about. So the derivation of the ethics is from the word ethos, from the Greek word for character and sentiment of the community. Other definitions of ethics includes the principles of conduct governing an individual or a profession, and standards of behavior. Now, ethics has become one of the biggest concerns in not only leadership but also in professional activities around the world. Coming out of the 2010 2008 financial failures, the pandemic issues, all of those things really start to tell us, a lot brings a lot of questions up about the ethical values of individuals in charge of these organizations, in charge of the activities that's gotten us into the mess that we seem to be in around the world. And in fact, in general, ethics about the leaders in positions of power around us. And this is why the model that we're looking at focuses our attention on them a lot because of how critical and important it is, or viewed. All right. So much so that most organizations now have their own um, standard operating procedures and ethical rules and values. In fact, I know because the accounting authority, the a what are they again? ACCA took such a beating after the 2008 and 2010 financial failures. The banking sector took some licks um, with the failure of the banking systems through that derivative market nonsense that took place. Yeah, I think that was in 2001 or two, somewhere around there. So I can't remember distinctly. I think it's the same 2010 period. But the failure of these and the predominance of greed as part one of the sets of activities that was taking place during then and those periods force those organizations to have to reevaluate the value structures that they've created in the organization from the profession's point of view, from so the accounting people, in fact, even radiologists and medical people have their own ethical standards. The question is, are we being held up to them um, in terms of our ethical values and our ethical behavior? Um, do our actions really show that we are aware of and are following those rules that supposedly govern our activities? All right. So, and that's an interesting question. Are you operate or do you see leadership around us in the various spheres of influence? Do you see them pro- um, really showing us that they understand ethics and they're following these ethical values? That really is going to be the question. The model here indicates that leaders have to take these very idyllic positions in terms of having high ethical values, but not only these values in in the organization's activities, but also in the overall activities in their lives. So what they're saying is that you can't have these ethical values only for work, and then when you get home you do something else, or when your private life you do different things. Your ethical values have to be consistent across the board. All right, and you have to be guided by that right through your life as well. Now we're not saying that your value systems can't evolve over time, but the idea is that these values have to be consistently utilized throughout your entire life. Now, and in all aspects of lives. That is going to be a particular challenge for a lot of people. Um, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges that have to be dealt with across the board when we're dealing with morals and moral values and that type of stuff. Um, when we talk about morals, here they're referring to moral values are really about the principles of right and wrong, or the quotation here, arising from one's conscience, a sense of good and evil, pertaining to the discernment of good and evil. All right, instructive of what is good or evil or bad. That is again some things that are evil today weren't evil. Well, might some of the things that were considered good today were evil in the past. So again, because of changing societies and changing evolution of time or the transition of time, we've found that some moral values that existed in the past no longer are consistent or considered that same way in the current future. And it's likely that we will have more changes in the moral landscape of our societies as we move forward, as things change, as society develops, as our technology probably develops as well. You're going to find those kind of things are going to be going and changing. So leadership in this model is values driven. So it's going to be really important for you as an individual to understand your own personal value structure and your value system. And therefore, that is going to be something that you have to pay attention to. So you need to understand yourself from that particular thing and ensure that the values that you are exhibiting are the types of values that you would like to see shown in the entire organization throughout. So values are freely chosen beliefs, all right, or the guiding principles of in our lives with respect to your personal and social ends. All right. So simply stated, values are our personal beliefs. So this is what the things that they're talking about. But as a leader, your values have to be a little better than others because you are the leadership position in the organization. That's going to be an important thing that you want to pay attention to. Hooligan. All right. Sorry about that again. Somebody had to get a password here. All right. All right. So we're talking about the importance of having these high moral values. The problem that we have is that we expect our leaders to be upright, honest, and ethical in their dealings, but oftentimes we find that they don't exhibit those qualities, especially in the political sphere. And that's the problem that we face. That's the challenge that we face. That as leaders, we ought to exhibit those values that we expect from other people. And that's a challenge. Um, but again, it is the cornerstone of the relational leadership model to make sure that the ethical values of the leader are congruent with the and consistently applied across the board with the society that we are existing in or working in. All right, and sometimes even stricter than the leaders that we have around us. All right. So we need to be bold. We need to be courageous. That's just some of the things that they talk about in relation to that. All right. We have somebody coming in. Oh, welcome back, Miss Rollins. We lost you there for a while.
Yes.
Uh,
Thank you.
no problem. All right. So we're talking here about the ethical values of the leader and their leadership in the leadership program that we're looking at. The fact that they need to make ensure that they are leaders are exhibiting high values and that type of stuff. The problem that we face with this though is that far too often the leaders around us have exhibited um, really bad ethical values. Not necessarily that they say things badly, but they do negative things, and it's both from a national level, even among your family members, your within smaller groupings. You see this type of thing. But the other element to that is what do we do when we see that happening? Oftentimes we tend to be apologetical. You know, we accept that politicians will lie, that they will steal, and we do nothing about it. And that apathy from society feeds into the national context where the expectation is that the leaders will be um, they what's the word I want to use? They will in fact be, bad. They will do wrong things, and we accept it. I mean, and that's a horrible thing to think about it, but that's how our society is. If we look at ourselves, and Trinidad and Tobago in particular, a lot of the leadership, we expect that they're going to thief. We expect that they're going to pocket money and they're going to look after themselves. We expect that they will have excesses, and we simply say, well, that's how it is. We like it so. Right? That's a horrible way to live life because it means we don't expect any change in the future. We have a very low view of what acceptable behavior would be, and that's really bad because that means we are tolerating unethical behavior, and it begins to permeate the entire society because the society starts to disintegrate based upon that. Because if we believe that these are the things we expect our politicians to do, then why not the leaders in the arms of the government, the judiciary, the executive, the 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 police force, the teaching services, all of these things start to suffer from this falling value structure that we've surrounded ourselves and we have accepted as being the status quo, and that unfortunately is a reality that is facing a lot of societies around us. That values are changing. They're changing negatively, and the degree of acceptance in society is that we can't do anything about it. Yes, somebody wanted to say something. At least I thought I did hear something. All right, so let's understand that that is something that this model is trying to recalibrate. Honestly speaking, that the understanding is that a lot of our leadership and activities suffer from failing value structures, and it means that we need to be able to correct that by our own evaluation of the the ethical values we hold to be important to us, and more importantly, that we kind of improve the value structure that we have there. The question about it is that will we get um, beaten down in society's willingness to agree to accept less than moral behavior, and that's some of the problems that as a leader you're going to face, and as a follower you're going to be challenged with because um, so look at this statement. Although some argue that the phrase ethical leadership is redundant because leadership cannot be experienced without an element of ethics, we feel that leadership that lacks ethical behavior and action is anything but leadership. But that's not true, because we have a lot of leadership that's not ethical, but still considered leaders, or still hold leadership positions, and there oftentimes seems to be there no consequence. That's the other element that becomes a little more frustrating. That individuals in society looking on at the behavior of particular leaders and the nature of their unethical behavior, yet still they don't seem to have any sort of consequence for that action, or at least the consequences not seem to be taking place. And that really is one of the challenges that we're going to be facing here as well in our society, because at this point in time, oftentimes it seems as if nobody seems to want to do anything right, and nobody gets punished for it. So again, that starts to bridge into other behaviors. So you start to find that um, younger people begin to look at us and say, well, if you're not being punished for doing the wrong things, why should I expect that I would be punished for doing something incorrectly? And they're not wrong, huh? Because if they're looking in the world around us and they're seeing this sort of stuff, um, who are we to tell them they're wrong? You know, and it becomes difficult that, let's say you live in a household where your parents behave in highly ethical manner, but you are bombarded by that negative situation outside of the house. That is eventually going to find itself coming into your household, and it's going to create some conflict for you, because you're going to be shaped by the world beyond your home, and that is going to create some sort of what we refer to as cognitive discord, um, and you are going to experience a lot of confusion and issues in relation to that cognitive disturbance that's taking place there. All right, so now a question that comes up about leadership is, should leaders be, or should leadership be values neutral or values driven? So what does that mean? Should leaders take value structures or ethical values into being when exercising leadership, or should you be neutral to that? That's an interesting question. This model says no, you need to be values driven, because if your values neutral, then there's no base playing field, and that's the concept that they wanted to look at here. But that as a leader, you should be values driven and know what is good to do. That's going to be an important element that you want to pay attention. So, as an exercise, a leader and a participant must ponder the soul searching questions such as, what do I stand for? Welcome back, Natasha.
Thank you. I'm back.
Right. How far am I willing to go to advance the common good or to do the right things? Now, those are some tricky questions, and that then brings us into the leading by example concept. If you, like me, have issues with the value structures we've seen around us today, what do we do and how do we challenge it? And should we challenge it? Um, and that's something that is a good thing for us to do, because it's part of the whole process of getting to know your own value structure and seeing what you're going to be looking at that. Of course, leading by example or modeling the way is probably the best way to teach leadership and empower others to do it, because you can't be a good leader without um, being an example to other people. Once you behave in a particular manner, you're going to encourage and influence people around you. Think about it from the perspective of being a child. Children copy what we do as adults. When we do something, that's the way that we're going to do it. Similarly, um, as a leader, what you do is going to model what you expect from other people to do. So the same thing about your value structure is going to be mirrored by the people around you and the people under you in your organization. So therefore, that's something that you have to pay attention to, because your example has to speak volumes, um, more so than what you actually have to say. Because this guy, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say, because especially if there's a mismatch between what you say and what you do, you need those things to match up. What you do and what you say needs to work together, congruent actions, right? That makes sense. So, um, so something borrowed from the authentic model. What can be considered ethical, right? So without authenticity, sorry, what can be considered ethical or moral? Terry defines authenticity as genuineness and refusal to engage in self-deception. So that action without authenticity erodes, right? So you can't be doing something just because it's supposed to be the right thing to do. You need to be doing it because you also believe that that is the correct thing to do. Um, that is important. So you have to be genuine in your activities. genuine to your own belief structure. That's a critical example that you want to be looking at there. Oh boy, Onessa is having problems. Welcome back, Onessa. Seeing you have some issues. All right. So leadership is not an easy situation, especially when you're coming into a situation where maybe you're going to be looking at uh, different value structures facing you in
Thanks,
the
sir. My laptop died.
okay, so you had to jump to another device. When you say die, did it die power wise or
Yes.
oh, oh so you're on your phone now, I guess.
No, I put
Okay. All right. So we understand this whole concept of leading by example. What you do teaches what's going on, and therefore, whatever ethical values you display in your example, in your activities, is what everybody else is going to copy. And it's again the if you think about it from a particular from a family or human development, what children see you do is what they will eventually end up doing. So that's something that you want to pay attention to, of course. All right, so let me get to the process element. So anything, for anything to kind of fit into an organization and more, um, to become more systematic, it means that we have to approach it from a systematic approach. It means we have to be more process oriented. The activities that we want to engage in has to be process oriented. Now we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to rush this thing a little bit here. In essence, in order for anything to become more ingrained in us, the relational leadership process the relational leadership model speaks about the process of us engaging in the knowing, being, doing, understanding self, empowering others, build it as a whole process. That it's something that is repeatable, and the activities and outcomes are intentional. And in the fact that the whole point is that we design it as a process so that we can get similar results every time we run it, especially if we follow the guidelines that we talk about. When groups design and implement ethical, inclusive empowerment processes that further a shared purpose, they can trust that the process will take them through difficult times, resolve ambiguous tasks, and be assured that together they will be better than they would be individually. Together they would be individually. Now, the whole point about this is that the process has to be one that creates that option all the time over and over again. For any of you all who understand process thinking or systemic thinking, it means that that system is going to generate a particular outcome 9 times out of 10. Um, and if you follow that process, it's going to be um, a systemic situation where you're going to be always churning out similar results all the time. But we need to ensure that the process that we're speaking about is the relational leadership process that involves the inclusiveness, the purpose, the positive purpose to be more thing, the empowerment element, and the inclusive nature of the whole process that we're looking at. So that whole thing, I think I have a diagram that kind of pulls that together. Well, I had a diagram from before. Um, Right. Process allows us to evaluate and make sure that things are um, that can be fixed if we know they're going wrong. That type of stuff. Those are the kind of things. Process is about cooperation and collaboration. That's an important element. In the process, collaboration and cooperation it becomes an embedded part of the activities that um, goes without saying, because though competition is something that drives a lot of activities, that adversarial approach to things kind of creates so most people think when you think about competition, that'll bring the best forward. Unfortunately, competition doesn't necessarily lead to that. Competition tends to um, engender pulling other people down, undoing other people's positions. So the collaborative and cooperative approach tends to work a lot better in terms of moving things forward in an environment that is more ethical driven or ethics driven. And it requires more work as well, because working together as opposed to working against is um, more sustainable in the long run than that competitive approach, because it means that at the end of the day somebody has to lose. In this case here, when you collaborate and you cooperate, everybody wins, or everybody has the potential to win and to improve. Okay, all right, so that's what cooperation and collaboration is speaking to in terms of this process. So all of these elements become part and parcel of the process that we engage in the relational leadership model. All right, the process is meaning making, meaning blah. Yeah. All right. So in other words, it's like the same thing we talked about between mattering and marginalization. These things have to mean something to people, and it has to mean something to you. Both, right. So meaning has both cognitive, which is ideas, and emotional components, which allows the person to understand some world vision, a representation of things the way they ought to be, and the places the person in the relationship, and places that person in the relationship to this worldview. Now, that means that when for something to mean something to somebody else, it means that it has to affect you from an emotive standpoint. Um, but it has to mean something logically to you as well. This is you get involved with an organization to do something, like let's say you decide to join Turtle Watchers, for example, or Nature Seekers. Their vision and mission is to ensure that they protect the environment, specifically in terms of turtle watching. They look after the environment where the leatherback turtles come up for nesting functions. They manage the activities that take place, and they look after those people. So that's a lot of work that's going on there. Does it mean anything to you? Does it, do you have a connection to it? Do you emotive connection to it? Those are the things that we're talking about when you join an organization. The leadership has to engender that type of shared responsibility, that ethical value. So you're not going to join because you want to, hey, I want to ride on the back of a leatherback turtle, dig up some eggs and have a look at them. You don't have those sort of negative ideas about it. You truly do want to look after the nature of things outside there. I mean, I have had unfortunately seen the remnants of turtle being slaughtered, and I mean that it was actually quite a horrible thing to look at and to see. But it was really something else that uh, when you see the aftermath of what took place there and all the eggs that were wasted, you know, it's an absolutely horrible experience. And if any of you all have gone to see, anybody here has ever gone turtle watching? The time for it coming up is sooner. Has anybody here ever gone turtle watching? Nobody? Wow, that's something you all should do.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah,
sir. I went.
where did you go?
Well, I live Las Cruces, so I went right Las Cruces.
Okay, all right. The bigger areas for that, or the more popular areas for turtle watching, is actually Matura in Toku. On that side, on that coast,
Rotura, Granny
Matura,
Bay.
So I
Granny
went
Bay.
on
Granny
Manila.
Bay.
You went where? Manzalina?
Yeah.
Right. You right? Okay. Manzalina was where I saw that turtle slaughter take place. That was really, but the nature seekers and the turtle watching clubs, those are things that you could go and join from a community-based type of activity. Their jobs are to try and look after the environment, so they do beach cleanups and stuff like that to start with. Um, but more importantly, what they also do is to try and make sure that they monitor what's taking place to protect these guys when they're coming up, because it's not only the leatherback turtles, but also the green turtles as well that they're having some problems with of late. That one tends to be more along the lines of fishermen. So, in order for us to get people to want to get involved in organizations, we need to, as leaders, make make it mean something to them. And for us to make it mean logically, we want people to connect with the organization, its goals and its values and its vision. And we want them to be committed to it, which means get an emotional charge from it to become committed to that particular action. So meaning me meaning making meaning. So information, well, data is converted into information. That information is then the basis of developing our knowledge. That knowledge leads to our understanding. That understanding then helps us to develop wisdom, and that wisdom drives our thoughts and actions. So this is the flow of meaning making. So this is what I was talking about in terms of the diagram about this meaning making thing. All right. Uh, so again, the importance of making things mean something for other people is part of your responsibility and part of the process that relational leadership process is all about. So I'm gonna have to speed through some of this. We're already after 8:30, so I don't want to take you all too far. Again, there's a lot of things. So reflection and contemplation. This is probably coming near to the end. Part of the process involved in relational leadership and the leadership model is about reflection and contemplation. And I can't say how important this is. Reflection is the process of pausing, stepping back from actions, and asking questions. What is happening? Why is it happening? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? What can I learn from this? This is something we oftentimes don't engage in. And it's probably one of the most powerful ways in the process to help to improve our leadership activities. In fact, anything that you engage in, once you spend some time doing reflection and contemplation, that helps you to improve your practice, to improve the organization, to improve your activities. That is something that is going to be important because you have to find some time to do some reflection, and it means time. You have to disengage from everything around you, shut down your phone, and think about what you've been doing and think about it in a direct manner. Probably even write about it. So most times when we talk about doing reflections, it actually requires you sitting, thinking, and writing about your reflections and feelings about what's taking place. You'd notice, for example, that one of your assignments is about exactly about this. So the idea here is that a lot of the assignments that we've set aside are to actually help you engage in the process that we speak about with the relational leadership model. All right, so talking a lot about reflections and that type of stuff and the impact and how healthy it is and how good it is that we engage in it. All right, so that kind of thing brings us to the end of this whole process. So we are going to have some more detailed examinations of certain aspects. So when we look at the other chapters that have to be presented, um, so we'd see understanding self. You see, you understand now where that comes from. Understanding others, that's part of the knowing, being, doing part. That's the elements there. Integrity and moral purpose. This brings up very quickly the ethical parts. Working in teams and groups, that is related to understanding others. So that development of team and group work. Now, courage and moral leadership from the DAF reinforces the ethical value structure that we've been talking about in terms of the value structures that we're talking about. Being in communities and complex organizations along with teams actually helps us to kind of place the context of broader activities in the the model that we're looking at. And when we operate in teams, groups, and communities, we're always talking about the whole idea of we are working with other people, and this is the way in which we're going to be doing it in the form of teams, form of groups, when we're part of communities, when we're part of complex organizations, which is really when we are part of um, firms and that type of stuff when we're working and stuff like that. All right. Vision and strategic direction. We're going to be dealing with that because vision and purpose is such a major part of the model. Power and influence. So we talked about that, empowerment and so on. This is where it comes from. So therefore, we have to engage in further analysis of that. And we spoke a lot about engaging in change, and which is why we have to look at leading change. So through all of the things that we're looking at here, we're going to be reinforcing the concepts coming up from chapter 3 in terms of the the stuff that we're looking at here. Anybody has any burning questions they want to ask at this point in time?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Concerning
Uh-huh.
the presentation, how
Yes.
much? How much? We supposed to have a specific number of slides, or it could be any amount.
Well, the amount of slides really is going to be based upon two things. One, the amount of content from the chapter, and two, the methodology you design to present the material and teach the material. That really will determine the amount of slides. So no, there's no
Okay.
prescribed number of slides that you're going to be creating. It's really a matter of your design
And how?
factors.
Okay, sir. And how much time do we have to present?
Now each class is roughly going to be 3 hours long, so each group will have up to an hour and a half to present their chapter or to teach their chapter. That makes sense?
Okay, sir.
Right? Okay. All right. No, any other questions? That's a good question, though. Let's see. No? Okay, so let me pause the recording. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope you understand that whole concept and get that model. It may require going back over some of this stuff or even just reading the chapter on your own, though.